Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Training to Endure. So, today we're going to briefly go over why I've started this podcast, and then I guess explore my own journey into endurance, what it's kind of given me and my current goals. And then in the future, I'll be joined by other guests as well. So, I guess the first question is why start a podcast? Now, I did start a podcast before, a very brief stint in podcasting before I decided to sack it in. That was basically because I started in COVID, and then the life went back to a shade of normality, which meant that I couldn't continue it while working. I mean, to be honest, I probably could have continued it, but I just chose to put my effort into actually earning some money because throughout the whole of COVID, I didn't earn anything. So that kind of took priority. Now, I guess the focus on starting a podcast again is kind of twofold. Firstly, I wanted to have conversations with people who were like-minded, who had, you know, had or do endurance-based activities and begin to explore, you know, what they do, why they do it, and how they train towards it. So, how they train both in a physical sense and also a psychological sense to do these huge feats of endurance, and to achieve these phenomenal things. I think the training side of things is always, looked into quite a lot, but actually the psychological component of this has huge value as well. And that's something I'll go into with my own journey in a bit. But I guess that's the kind of reason that I've started this. Now, another reason is that actually I wanted to have some and produce some longer form content. I enjoy producing and kind of engaging in conversations, like long conversations. I enjoy watching them. I think they add a huge amount of value to people in general. And I'm a bit sick and tired of like all the Instagram, TikTok bullshit where it is 15 seconds of shite and then it's gone. I wanted to have like really good, deep conversations with people. And I guess like naturally, I thought podcasting would be a great way to do that. So, hence the reason I have started this podcast. Um, so what does the podcast aim to do? Well, firstly, it aims to have conversations, like good conversations with different and interesting people. It looks to explore their mindset into training and into how they physically and mentally deal with the arduous task of training for an endurance event, but also it begins to look at endurance as a whole. What I want to do is not just stick to the typical, running Ironman kind of events. I want to look at other ones as well. Now, that might not be something that I can explore too immediately, mainly because I'm a running coach. So most people that I have contact with are mainly runners or cyclists or things like that. However, in the future, my aim is to begin looking outside of that, begin looking into other realms of endurance, whether that's walking, whether that is mountaineering, climbing, whether that is rowing. I think, there's a lot that you can look into, and the aim is to kind of explore that. As much as it is to look at the physical, it's I've kind of said this before, it's to look at the mental as well, because I know from my personal perspective, I've gained a huge amount mentally out, from pushing myself physically. And I think there is such like a strong connection between the two. And pushing yourself physically gives you confidence in what you can do, um, like psychologically, which then allows you to push yourself in other areas of life. So really beginning to explore the minds of people who engage in endurance style activities is also something that really interests me, and I think a lot of other people as well. So if we can do both, then that is kind of those boxes ticked. Who is this podcast for? Well, anyone that has any interest in pushing themselves further in endurance style activities, in good conversation, in self-development, because I think, again, people that engage in these kind of pursuits want to further themselves physically, mentally, or an element of both. So being, with that being such an underlying theme, I think anyone who has interest in that can take parts of it, apply it to the area they see fit, and be successful with it. I think from my perspective and from the people that I've spoken to before, there are common themes that run the whole way through, and those kind of lessons and themes can be put into multiple contexts. So it doesn't have to be just someone who is interested in endurance per se. I think a lot of people can take value from these conversations, and a lot of people can apply these lessons into their own life if they want, to get more out of life, to achieve more, if they want to push themselves out of their comfort zone, if they want to get a little bit further. If that applies to you, then you're in the right place. This podcast is probably going to be for you. So I guess the best way to start is talk about my own personal journey. Now, I played rugby for many years, from school age all the way through to university. I then, after leaving university, went down a bit more of a powerlifting and strongman route. Got very out of shape. I was strong, but I was fat. And I kind of went through a bit of a period of my life where my life, I guess, got a bit turned upside down at the end of a relationship. And I came back from that pretty broken, pretty hurt, and not really knowing who I was, what I wanted to do. And I guess I was a bit lost, to be honest. From there, I went into working in a gym, and it very quickly became apparent that I was the fat PT. I went into this environment where every single person that was there was in good shape. I was the one who wasn't. And I think previously, where I had hidden or told myself that I could get away with being the fat guy because I was strong, that very quickly got blown out of the water when there were guys there who were lifting just as much weight as me, if not stronger than me, and they were 20 kilos lighter. So very quickly I realized I needed to sort my shit out, which I did through a combination of like regular exercise, through walking more because I was much more active, and also just through diet, basically not eating like a bellend, not chopping 12 pints a night, or the basic stuff that the stuff I knew. Like, I'd done a nutrition degree, I had the knowledge, but I just somehow had convinced myself that, I don't really know. I somehow just convinced myself that actually being bigger and stronger was what I wanted to kind of do. I guess that was a bit of a mask for me. But anyway, moving from that, I was personal training people, and a friend of mine reached out after watching the SAS Who Dares Wins program. And I think it was the first series they did, the fan dance, which is part of the initial phase of training for the SAS. And at the end of the kind of hills phase, they do this march over the Brecon Beacons, over Pen y Fan. And it's about 24-kilometer route. You go up and back. And that is the fan dance. Essentially, it's a loaded march, and he said he wanted to do it. He was buzzing off watching SAS Who Dares Wins, and kind of had researched it and found that there was a race that did that. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll train you. And then I was like, actually, do you know what? Why don't I give that a go as well? It would be a challenge. Another friend of mine also heard we were doing it. He jumped on board. And actually, ironically, the guy who originally suggested it didn't end up doing it. So it was just me and this other guy, this other friend of mine who ended up doing it. And I guess that was my first entry into running. Now, I'd run a bit before. I had, trained for rugby. So I was, had fitness before. I'd done an element of running through that. When I was younger, I did a bit of running, whether that was just doing 5Ks here and there. I remember there was a 5-mile route we used to do in the summer. So yeah, I guess I just began kind of training for this run, which just meant I just began running a bit more. I was still doing all my other workouts. I was just adding some running elements in. And I actually remember the kind of last long run before the event, I ended up doing, I think it was like 20 miles in boots on a ridiculously hot day, because I wanted to run further and do something equally as hard just to make sure I was kind of mentally ready for it. Anyway, so turn up on the day, and we do the fan dance. And for anyone who's ever been up to the Brecon Beacons and been on Pen y Fan, you'll know how fantastic the views are. I mean, I'd never experienced anything like it, really. And actually, it was a really misty start to the day as we went up, and literally as we got to the top and I went over to Jacob's Ladder, which is the kind of downhill section, the kind of mist and the fog had cleared, and we just had this beautiful sunshine that kind of just lit up the whole valley, and it was absolutely spectacular. And I guess that was kind of the first entry level into trail running and doing those style of events. And a constant theme for me has been getting into nature, has been exploring that and experience that kind of connection with it and traveling through it. So at the end of the fan dance, which actually on reflection wasn't as hard as I'd kind of made it out to be psychologically, and ironically the week before, where I'd done that horrible run on my own, was harder than the actual fan dance itself. But I think a big part of that was that I had built this thing up in my head as being so incredibly difficult, and then when I actually went and completed it, I was like, okay, yeah, that was tough, that was hard, but I could do more. Like, I feel okay, I've recovered, I can actually push myself further. And that was kind of one of the things that stuck in my head. And I guess that's been a constant theme through my running career, per se. I have constantly achieved things which I didn't think possible or perceived as being exceptionally difficult. And then I've always kind of thought, actually, I've got a little bit more. I can push a little bit harder. And at times that has been the case. At times, I've not finished races. So, and I guess this is probably something that you will see with people that complete these endurance events, is that it's almost like constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible for you as an individual. And I think for me, as someone who had kind of been through a bit of a rough patch in their life, and then found myself doing these events, completing them and achieving and pushing myself further, that then had an incredible effect upon what I could do career-wise, what I could do in my own life, because I was like, well, if I can go and achieve, that event, that run, then why can't I do something else? We place these perceptions of what's possible upon ourselves. And then when we overcome them, when we go past them, actually, that's a really powerful thing. When you push past your expectations, then your expectations become a little bit higher. And then your understanding of what you're capable of becomes a little bit higher. So you can push further and further. And whether that's in an event or whether that's outside of an event. And I think the two, have such a translation with each other. Now, the kind of other side of this whole story and the underlying element of it, which probably helped with that element of confidence, is actually the time on my feet out running, exploring, was headspace. And I wouldn't say I've ever struggled with depression, so I can't say what that's like, but I would say that I have had times that have been very difficult because my head has been so busy and because my brain has been moving so fast. And then when I found running, and I found this in other endurance sports, walking and cycling as well, you kind of just find a little bit of peace and a little bit of time to actually sit in your thoughts and think them through and work through the process. Whenever I, feel like I need the answer to something, or I'm struggling with a problem now, I know that going out for a walk can often help me come to the conclusion that I need to on said problem. And I think that was the first time ever, or in a long time, where actually I just had that ability to sit with my thoughts and work them through. Now, as someone who was struggling with a sense of purpose, a sense of self-confidence, I struggled with self-belief a lot, and even to the, I wasn't, I don't really know how to explain this. Self-compassion is a good word. I didn't love myself. I didn't think a lot of myself. I wasn't proud of who I was. And actually, over a period of time, I began to build that. I began to connect with who I was, what I enjoyed, what I valued, what was important to me. I began to celebrate my wins. I began to actually think, you know what, you've done something great. You've achieved something that's awesome. Whereas before, those voices in my head had been very negative, I then found a space where they were not so negative, and I could actually be proud of what I was doing and what I was accomplishing. And actually, I've just had a bit of a brainwave into why, I think I'm very achievement driven, which has been a result of me feeling like I didn't achieve a lot when I was younger, and I didn't push myself, and I didn't fulfill my potential per se. So I think when I found something which actually allowed me to do that a little bit more, to explore that, to achieve, to push myself forward, then I actually grabbed onto that and began to use that as fuel to the fire, and began in my own head to feel like I had done something good, and I was succeeding, and I was being successful. Now, that then has translation across to what I could do outside of that with my own business, with all areas of my life, from love life to relationship with family to quit and drink. All these different areas began to kind of slot into place. And it was only when I started running that I really felt like I had a bit of control and I could move the needle forwards in what I wanted to do and what I wanted to achieve, and even begin to understand what that was. So that was kind of how I got into the endurance side of things and what I really got out of it. And from there, it's just been kind of an accumulation of events, I guess. I started with a marathon, which was Brighton Marathon. I then did a 2-day ultra marathon where I ran 50K one day, 50K the next. That following winter, I actually ran a longer ultra marathon, which was about 75 kilometers in Dorset. That one I didn't end up doing, and I only ended up running 65 kilometers. I basically got timed out because I wasn't fit enough. I hadn't trained hard enough. And I had gone into it with some pretty naive expectations. Luckily, it's all a learning curve, and I actually managed to go back the following year and complete that. Just before I went back and completed that, I did an 8-hour challenge where you just ran in a 6.5, I think it was a 6-kilometer loop for 8 hours. So I managed to rack up 60K in that time. From there, I don't think I did anything. Oh no, from there, I think it was COVID. I then ended up doing an 85-kilometer run with a friend of mine. We did that self-supported, so there were no aid stations. It wasn't a race. It was basically a training run for something that he was doing. From there, I entered another marathon, which I did, which kind of brings us up to now, really. Actually, and after the marathon, I did another ultra marathon, which was a 50K one. But anyway, so that brings us all the way up to this point. And I knew the next year I wanted to run 100 kilometers. And I had the Race to the Stones in mind. If you remember that race I did where it was 50K one day, 50K the next, that was Race to the Stones. That was one option you could do. The second option is to run 100K through straight. So originally I was thinking, do you know what? I'll go back, do the full thing, tick that box, and then done. However, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and the other race I'd been looking at was the UTS 100, which is Ultra Trail Snowdonia 100. Now that is a hard race. 100 kilometers is a long way at the best of times, but when you're running over the Welsh mountains, it makes it a little bit harder, doesn't it? So to put it into perspective, the 85-kilometer race or run that I did before with a friend of mine, that took us 15.5 hours, and that was 1,500 meters of elevation. The UTS 100 is 100 kilometers with 6,500 meters of elevation. So it's hilly, basically. So that kind of brings us up to here. And it is today the 12th of December. And yeah, I am in training for the UTS 100. So I guess over the course of the kind of following, over the course of the following podcast, I will from time to time be talking about my own journey and how that is working out. And I will also be putting a fair amount of content on YouTube as well, following me in this process. So you can follow on here. You can also follow online on YouTube. So you kind of have some options if that does interest you. To be honest, this race scares the shit out of me because it's just, I guess it's the next big thing, isn't it? It's whenever you're doing something which you don't fully know is going to be achievable. I haven't done anything this long in a very long time. And although the distance I know I've got in my legs, the prospect of doing that much elevation is, quite frankly, very scary. But I am fitter and have got a lot more experience and knowledge than where I was a few years ago. So I'm looking forward to putting it to the test. It's going to be a tough kind of 5-6 months of training, but I'm sure it will all be worthwhile in the end. So yeah, that is the podcast for today. A brief introduction of what I aim to do, why I'm doing it, and also my own journey. If you know of someone whose story you'd like me to explore, then please let me know. If you have suggestions for topics to cover, or you have particular, I don't know, races or things like that that you think would be useful to cover, then likewise, I'm open to suggestions. Let me know through Instagram. You can find me at Ollie W. McCarthy. Email ollie@mccarthysf.com. Or if you want to comment on YouTube or on your podcasting, was it contributor of choice? Is that the right word? However you're listening to this podcast, if you send a message through there, do so. I'm not even sure if it's a thing. I think probably right now is a good place to end. Otherwise, I'm going to end up rambling. Right. That is the first episode done. We have 4 episodes or so recorded. So they're going to come out after this one in the first series. So if you want to stay up to date with this, then make sure you subscribe, make sure you give it a like, comment on it, and yeah, let us know how you find the episode. That is me, Ollie Mac, out.